Welcome to the Praxology Podcast, where theology fuels the mission of the church by encouraging her to think theologically, reflect biblically, and of course, act missionally. On today's episode, we continue the series, Serving Missionally, Your Toolkit for Success, by talking about how to use authority. It's a very important topic. All believers have been granted authority by Jesus in the Great Commission, but how does this relate to people and processes on teams? I am Sean Smith with Tyler Patty.
Hello, hello.
As always, let's dive right in European realist fashion and talk about abuse of authority.
Oh no, I'm just going straight for the throat.
I thought it would be quite fun to create a case study type of approach for this discussion, this episode. So, do you have an example for us, Tyler, of the abuse of authority causing problems in a local team, a local ministry, or a local church?
It's hard to give specific examples because of...
You could create a false one from real stories that you know, so we protect people who are potentially involved, whatever.
Oh man, well I know you have one in mind.
I do.
Why don't you go? Why don't you start? And if I know, I'll see if I can construct something.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My example comes from a Pentecostal charismatic church. I was not a part of this church. I am glad for this. I had to visit this church as a part of a series of a church history class, I think it was, would have been my second master's, my Master of Divinity when I was in Chicago. So this church is somewhere there, but that's such a big area that it's not giving anything away. And I decided to visit this church because I thought, there's some interesting things going on here. I go to this church with my wife, and we're just supposed to make observations because it's a different denomination and setting than we typically go to. And the service is like 2.5 hours long, which compared to an hour of what we're used to is different, yeah. And it was still going when we left. The reason that we left, well, let me back up and I'll try to go in sequential order quickly. This church is, I'm convinced, trying to be the next Bethel or Hillsong. Like they had created a band of the youth and were like championing the youth. Like, yeah, we're equipping the youth. But basically they were just using them, it seemed to me, to create this musical album. And so because of this music album, which actually the music quality was great. It was good. But because of that, they were spending way more money than the church had value on musical equipment. And during the service, the pastor was calling on people to give money because they had stopped and they weren't giving enough because they needed a multi-million-dollar sound system to make everything better. I read into that immediately and I thought, that's an abuse of power. This guy is setting himself up like a mega pastor. He wants to be cool and hip and write the books and have people all the stuff and have this like elevation worship, connected to the church, or Hillsong connected to the church and going across the world and doing these worship things. Multi-million-dollars. Like I'm looking around, like there's not that many people here. What is happening? Okay,
Oh my goodness.
I can stomach that. Like I feel bad for the people going here because if what I think is true is actually true, and I haven't checked on this church and how they're doing in a long time. Maybe I won't.
They haven't popped up in your Spotify feed?
Oh no. I never would have searched from there. Not at that time. My Spotify life was after that.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I Spotify like every day now when I'm working and stuff. But then I was not so much. I don't know what I listened to back in the day when that was like CDs. 7 years ago, maybe. I listened to CDs in my car 7 years ago. Oh yeah, on the way.
So old.
Maybe to some people. But not to others.
No.
And then later in this service, he's preaching and going on and using very specific people, like leveraging them. And kind of my interpretation was the rest of you need to be like these two people because you're not. And what those two people were doing was like basically giving their soul to the church. as it were. One of them was the youth who was leading this music thing. And so it was just, to me, it's like, wow, this is complex, caught up in a lot of different processes in this church, and it seems abusive. Potential, anyway. Action potential definitely there. Yeah. And then in the sermon, it ends in Pentecostal fashion. And I feel like I need to present a systematic defense of some of these matters, because what I'm about to say, I don't agree with the practice of, but theologically, I would agree that it's possible and does happen. But the issue, I'm Pentecostal, speaking in tongues. We don't have to go there. If I do, pause me. But he's literally commanding people, speak in tongues, pray in tongues, every 30 seconds to a minute, while this same music is going on in the background. Music is used to drum up emotion, and that is a positive thing. Is and can be a positive thing. Most people think we have to get emotion out of here. No, it's the Psalms. I rest my case. But in this case, it was very clear. It was part of the whole thing, praying in tongues and getting people to have this, like, stir up this emotion. And I'm listening around, and everybody's speaking the same language. Like, literally, it sounds the same as if they had learned it from each other. And it also sounded somewhat Hebrew, but none of them knew Hebrew. And that's typical. And some people say that's the language of God, but whatever. I don't think so. It was just highly manipulative. I don't know if I can lay the claim of abuse, because I left. I left the service, and the people were like, hopefully we'll see it next service on Sunday, which is more, this is telling actually. We were there on a Friday night.
Oh, wow.
And they said, come back on Sunday, because Sunday is more, Sunday's even more exciting. Or whatever.
Even more exciting.
And like, the service was 2.5 hours long. And like, how do you get more exciting and like moving pieces happening than this? Wow. But we just left, because I mean, that abuse of authority from the top down, just heavily manipulative. I mean, we're speaking in Central and Eastern Europe, and the word manipulation, even getting a slight smell as it's as the chicken's 20 minutes in cooking to 40, not done yet. You just get this people say, oh, get that out of here, like it's half baked, and people still don't want it. Manipulation, bad. I agree. That was caveman conversation.
Manipulation, bad.
That's my example. That's directly in a local church of abuse of authority and or manipulation. I think those overlap, but
absolutely. That's very interesting. Yeah. I mean, there are examples that come to mind for me. I mean, you got something else?
Church boss. I've got a couple.
Church boss.
You know that one person in the congregation who's elevated status, and they give themselves prominence, plus they've been there forever. And so people give them this, and they just say yes and wear it like a badge. Church boss. Like they're the ones that are behind everything and make things happen. That also, I think, is possibly an abuse of authority that's given to them by a congregation. I'm thinking of a couple of different ways, but
yeah. Man. Yeah. I mean, there for sure are examples that come to mind for me. I think what you described is more common in Pentecostal tradition, where or the charismatic tradition, where there's a lot of authority vested into kind of one person. I'm trying to think of something that an abuse of authority or a misuse of authority in a different context. I mean, we think about sin being, there are sins of commission and sins of omission. So there's also for sure,
maybe define those. So if others aren't tracking. So
sin of commission is sinning by doing something, by going too far, and then there are also sins of omission where you fail to do something. And I think, there's an example that comes to mind for me of a church leader here in the Czech Republic who failed to step in soon enough into a situation of conflict on a church team. He was overseeing this denomination, and just kind of stood by the wayside while things were falling apart, and failed to jump in and address the situation and bring clarity and bring unity and find a way forward. And so that also, I think, is a misuse of authority.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now let's take maybe one of these examples, or maybe probably just one, and ask ourselves, in each of these, in this case, what's the way out? Like this happened, manipulation, abuse, whatever. What's the way out? What knowledge was missing from the toolkit that's needed to lead from bad practice to good practice? What do we think? Which example should we choose? The locus of authority from the Pentecostal example, or dispersed otherwise?
Yeah. I mean, let's start with yours, because that's a great, a fun one to unpack. There's a lot there.
It's more clearly defined and easy as a case study to talk about. Yeah. I imagine, if I can fill in the gaps, I mean, you nailed the literature, though, I think, of an ego.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of how governmental structure or structures in charismatic churches tends to be more like pastor centric, or the main prophet centric, like locus of authorities in one person, and then that's dispersed to others according to what they would say represent them internally would be, or from insider perspective, a biblical model, because God spoke to the prophets spoke to everybody else. That's Tyler's like, yeah, I'm just gonna, I disagree. Of course. I imagine one thing in those meetings, because of that, is that person's giving a high directive to people, and not really inviting people into the process. And if so, probably it's almost more like a pat on the back, like, oh, you had an idea, and then they just take it and run and make it their own. And so it's kind of about them for some reason. Like they have, I don't know, they need to maintain control and they don't know how. And so they, like last episode, it's not dispersed like Jesus would potentially do. It's I have to keep control and keep this ball moving. And I'm afraid of releasing too much because it might get out of control. And some of that might be related to family of origin, how this person grew up, and their internal like psychology, and they have this need and they're fulfilling it in a bad way. Those are a couple of things. I think drawing those to the surface and being aware of those could lead from potentially awful practice to better. Recognizing what are my tendencies when things are getting out of control. And some things like that can be helpful.
Yeah. There's been an interesting book written in the last few years. I forget who the author is, but the title is "When Narcissism Comes to Church," and it's misrepresented quite a bit by people that think, the author's just saying that every pastor is a narcissist, is egotistical, but what she actually is arguing is that we all are on that sort of a spectrum. We all have some responses that are somewhat, selfish, maybe narcissistic. And as leaders, those are heightened because we feel the pressure. And so we act out. And like you said, we need to be aware of what are our responses under threat, under pressure, and how do we wield that authority in those moments. We need to be really thoughtful and reflective about that. Otherwise, we can cause so much damage.
Yeah. Are you conflict avoidant, or you face conflict head on and you enjoy the challenge? You somewhere in between. There's a lot of I can't think of there's like personality tests and animal tests and various ones that show your conflict style, but I forget what that's called. There's like 4 quadrants. I've taken it before and it was really helpful. If I can find it, maybe we'll throw it in the show notes. But that's, yeah. It's from MTI, Missionary Training Institute, in Colorado. That's where we took the test. And it was like 4 animals. And it was like the conflict avoidant people were like the people they're the animals that go back into their shell.
Yeah.
Like a turtle or whatever, I don't know. And others were like lions or something. Like, it's like, let me at it. Figure this out.
Let me at it.
And even in that conflict, you're trying to take control. Yes. I think knowing, like, do you know these things about yourself?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what we're reflecting on in terms of a missional toolkit to avoid abuse of power and to model a Christ-like behavior, attitude, and disposition. Knowing our tendencies is, I mean, that's a, like, in this way we're talking about it, we can almost say it's a spiritual exercise. It's odd, like, but it's dealing with who we are and made in God's image with the indwelling Spirit, who's constantly, who has united us in Christ. Then at this level, thinking, it's kind of like what we have argued for self-care in a sense, and rest, but applying it slightly tangentially to this, I think is probably fair in terms of the structure of the method of how we're getting here. The Spirit's working in us deeply. And so if we can know our tendencies, do we make quick or slow decisions? Do we lack self-knowledge? Like, do we think of ourselves more highly than we should? The Bible says we do. But do we lack self-knowledge in the sense of how good is our self-reflection? Because I think the Spirit uses our self-reflection, and can use that so we can see more and follow Him. And do we invite people into the process, or what does that look like when there's conflict?
I think it's very easy for me when I feel pressure or enter conflict to kind of, the blinders come up, like you're like a horse. Like they put the blinders on and then you just run straight and you're not aware of what's going around you. And so
exhausting.
Yeah, it does. One way to take those blinders off is to ask for help, ask for input. And I found that really helpful. Not just people who are going to tell me what I want to hear, but maybe shine some light on a blind spot, or even asking my team, what am I missing? You guys have different strengths than I do. And so, as we talked about last week, I need you. I need your input as we navigate challenging situations. So
this reinforces that idea of collaboration from that book, Teams That Thrive.
That's right.
From last week. Let's pause there. Go into the lightning round.
Oh, now it's my turn.
And then we'll enter into we'll introduce 4. I don't know, concepts isn't the right word, from a particular book that helps us to think about authority, and that's where we'll land. But first.
Great. So, Sean, it's my turn to ask you some questions. Are you ready?
We'll find out.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Sean, tell me about your actual breakfast habits versus your ideal breakfast habits.
Are you talking about when I remember to eat or when I actually eat?
Tell me what you actually eat and tell me what you would like to eat.
I thought ahead yesterday, thinking I've got to get my son to school on a certain time. I've got to be here because we're filming this in the morning, and so it's like time constrained. I wake up, I maximize the sleep, If I get up before 7, my kids get up too, and we don't like them to get up before 7. All this stuff factors in. So yesterday I went to Bela, supermarket, German. It's great. It's really close to where I live also. And I got a protein bar because I thought that 30 grams of protein is really going to hold me over.
Okay.
And they taste okay. I enjoy them. So that's my actual breakfast. My ideal breakfast would be eggs over easy with like the runny yolk that comes out, a little bit of salt, or maybe scrambled eggs with some basil and some other things inside. Lots of spices I like, but my family doesn't like that as much. And maybe because we're in the autumn season, fall.
A pumpkin spice latte on the side.
No. A nice single origin AeroPress, yes. But alongside of that, plus the eggs, a nice pumpkin spiced pancake.
Ooh. All right. Next question. When you write a book, what color will its cover be and why?
When? I stopped there. That's nice. What color? Is that my decision? I defer to the publisher.
No, it's your decision. The publisher said, on this occasion, Sean, you get to pick the color.
Shades of blue.
And why?
Because it's related to the Spirit who is open in the sky.
Who hovered over
is
the
blue.
waters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So shades of blue.
Genesis 1, 2.
That are like brighter shades of blue than muted. It's a workable theory.
Okay, fantastic. Last question. In all of your experience of work and ministry, who do you most fondly remember as a leader? And what about them do you remember fondly?
I have like 6 people like pinging around in my head. Like, which one do I choose? I'll try to synthesize it. Why do I remember them so fondly?
Mm-hmm.
Because they modeled the way and inspired a shared vision for me.
Mm.
To use that language. It's also hiding. Because they had good character, I wanted to, I like asked several of them to mentor me directly.
Mm-hmm.
But they allowed me to participate in what was going on in a meaningful way, not just you're in seminary, here's some things to do. And then they actually invited my own individual collaboration. They thought ahead for me. Like I did a thing for a church and an internship related to my future ministry. And I knew my future ministry was here, not there. I said, can I do that? They said, sure. It might be helpful for us. You never know, like what we learn and so on.
Yeah.
So really allowing me to be fully engaged and thinking ahead on my behalf. Like they were trying to give me space to collect a vision to follow God.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. Awesome. And so ends the lightning round. You've passed. Good job.
I did not look at these questions ahead of time, just for those of you wondering. And it's kind of interesting. As I'm self-reflecting, I was like, my body's a little tense.
Oh,
like,
no.
You're like 3, 2, 1. I'm like, oh, no.
I put the pressure on. I abused my authority.
Or made it entertaining for listeners. Maybe? I don't know. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Let's move forward then into this old study.
Yes.
But old is not always bad. The modern missional movement, sometimes old is bad. Old can be good and just tested over time. And this one, I think, well, we'll see what works and what doesn't work related to people, processes, authority, and so forth. So Tyler, introduce us to Mr. Cormack.
Mr. Cormack. Welcoming Mr. Cormack to the table. He wrote a study in 1987 on different leadership styles, essentially, or in particular, different ways that leaders relate to their staff, basically. And it's just a helpful tool to be able to think about, what experience have I had in being led, and then what is my kind of default way of leading others.
Which is a good toolbox thing to add.
It is a very helpful toolbox thing to add, and is, in terms of developing that self-awareness, it's really helpful. So the first one is the line structure model, where basically it's a hierarchical model where it's very clear who's above and who's below. And the reason that this is helpful is that it brings a lot of...
Who's above the line and who's below the line.
Who's above the line and below
Literally,
the line.
yes.
Yeah, essentially, what is the different levels of authority on a team, and how do they relate to one another? It's helpful in that it brings clarity, but it's not so helpful in that often that one at the top can be kind of an autocrat. I make the final decision, and so it's a model that very easily can tend toward an abuse of authority. It doesn't protect against that.
Do it my way or you're fired.
Essentially, yeah. In the worst situations, yeah, that's what it can look like. So basically, you're asking, where am I in the order of authority in this space? The second is the staff structure model, which is a little bit more complex. It's basically, there are leaders at the top, but they're also leading those who are leading others, and so it's a little bit more of a dispersed model that's really about kind of maintaining some cohesion through dispersion, essentially. And so that can be helpful in terms of empowering others, but it can also be unhelpful in that there are multiple levels that decisions need to go through. Essentially, it's still somewhat hierarchical. It has to go through different levels. Maybe it has to go all the way to the top, and it can take a long time. So, but in general, the staff structure is asking the question, where are people best suited based on their gifts and their skills? So you're prioritizing the people.
People over process.
People over process.
In this one, yeah.
The third one is kind of the opposite. It's the functional model, and that's the leader here is really interested in optimization. So it's more focused on process over people and saying,
get stuff done.
What has to happen? Okay, where do we plug people? And it doesn't matter as much, whether this is a job that you want to do, or whether maybe that you're good at, but it might not be very fulfilling. But that's not the priority. The priority is there's a functional thing that needs to be accomplished. And the final model that in 1987 was identified is the matrix model, which
is that when the Matrix movies originated? Also, in the 80s?
That's where the Matrix movies came from. The Wachowski brothers, they read this book and they said, well, we want that. We want that for our future. And so they, brought in Keanu Reeves and made it happen. So
real-time fact check. We're just making that up.
Making that up. No, so the Matrix, not just the movie Matrix, but in general, it's an idea that things are interconnected from multiple points with multiple points of overlap and contact. And so that the purpose here is to empower as many people as possible to accomplish things. And so it probably has a lower priority of authority, like in terms of the hierarchical understanding of authority, and more of an empowering mentality. So the purpose is, how do we delegate as much authority and as much responsibility throughout the system as possible? Benefits are obviously that people are empowered, but a possible weakness is that there can be lack of clarity. The system might be very, very complex, and it might be very difficult to navigate it. How do I relate to this person? How do I get this decision approved? How do we collaborate together? There's a lot of overlap, and so that can result in some confusion. So line structure, staff structure, functional structure, and the matrix structure. So, yeah, what do you think about this, John?
I think it's a fun way of putting what's rather quite obvious, but it allows for comparison in doing it this way. And the question that's coming to mind is, like somebody recently asked Tyler and I, related to education in a meeting, our vision for what education looks like.
Yes.
And we had to come up with a picture. And I adapt that question and say, when you think of leadership, what picture comes to mind? And how a team functions and works. Yeah. How do you relate within that? What picture is that? Maybe pause if you're able and go find an image and actually try to figure that out.
Go find a GIF. Mm-hmm. Some dancing dogs or something.
Why not cats?
Because I like dogs better. And you asked me a question about dogs, but I don't
But
have
his
a dog
name
yet.
is Irenaeus.
His name is Irenaeus. True.
Did Irenaeus exist if you don't actually have a dog?
Ooh, now we're getting into
historical Irenaeus.
It is a fun exercise, though, to sit down and say, okay, I don't have to write out my whole philosophy of leadership, but let me just pick one image that illustrates best how I approach leading.
Yeah, for me, it's the matrix idea. Like I think that way. I integrate everything, and I see things oftentimes. Like it really does help me to think it, like the show Sherlock. Who hasn't seen that show? I think everybody has, probably.
And for Europeans, they might be more familiar with House.
House is very similar. Really?
Yeah. It's a big deal.
I should mention, hey, I watched House. I didn't watch the later seasons because they got weird. I should go back and finish that. Okay. Very similar in how they think, like with like they draw like these crazy things that they're seeing in their mind, but you're seeing it on the actual screen. That's kind of how my mind works. But it's literally like putting things in a matrix. And that's how I prefer to think, because I don't know if it's, I have a self-conscious thing of like, I know I can't pull this off, but who can? And so I just want to pull somebody else in, and I'm always wanting feedback loops so that it can be the best possible.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's that matrix model.
Yes. I'm much more comfortable in the staff structure model myself. I think in terms of people and where their gifts and strengths are, and then kind of optimizing them into different spaces. So I have a harder time navigating the matrix complexity that you're describing, and more think about how optimizing people. So all that to say, it's not a question of which of these models is the best. Mm-hmm. These are all models that are used, and we all have tendencies towards them, but we also need to think about, is there a better way, or is there something that is there a weakness here that I need to be aware of? For me, I can sometimes over prioritize people and under prioritize process. And so if there are things to be done, I won't push my team as much as maybe I should. Sometimes, yeah, I do push you guys. Recently, we've been pushing hard, but I don't think in terms of outcome as much as I think of how the team is experiencing the process. Mm-hmm. And that could be a weakness. If I have a very important deadline, a very important thing that needs to happen, that we need to accomplish, it could be hard for me to accomplish that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm more, I'm quite the opposite, mm-hmm. that I'm not afraid to push. I think in recent years I have gotten better, because I didn't used to be very good at seeing people. I think I'm better in that realm now, and continuing to get better, thankfully. But I'm not afraid to push people for
an outcome.
if I think it's necessary, but not just the outcome right now, it's that outcome in the future. How does it fit into the broader vision? I think that's very, very important, that we can't lose track of the, what did the other study say? The purpose. We can't lose track of the purpose. That's always that's the anchor. If our boat's going all crazy, we always go back to purpose, put that anchor in the ground, and then we're stable. So maybe one final thing as we're wrapping up here. In terms of, these structures, part of me wants to go, is there a fifth?
Yes, and that is a great question. Yeah.
You have thoughts?
I don't have final thoughts, but I do think that it's this is a good opportunity to move into the realm of theology and try to bring some things back in to our leadership practice. And so these might be, working business models, but when we think about leadership in biblical terms, how does servant leadership fit into this?
You're doing the pastoral cycle from way back in season 1.
There we go. So here's our experience. Here's the things that we know. But how do we bring theology? How do we bring the Bible back? And then how does that inform our practice moving forward? So, what does it mean to lead, not like a businessman, but like a shepherd, a servant leader, what's the term? A delegated shepherd. Jesus is the good shepherd.
Roman Toshek.
That's right.
He's the first sheep.
The first among the sheep. Right. So
the pastor of one of the churches I was giving an example of earlier, the first among equals. That's what he calls himself.
Yes.
That elder-led church that I was at previous episode, I think. First among equals is what he calls himself.
First among equals, the first of the sheep. So how do we follow Jesus as our good shepherd? How do we then live and lead in cruciform, in cross-shaped ways that reflects the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus? These are things that we need to think about. Yeah, and maybe there's a fifth model.
Mm-hmm. I always think there's maybe a blend of a fifth that's emerging that's not identified. And maybe it actually has. I'm not as up on the literature since 1987 on this particular thing. So perhaps there is something out there. And if there is, write to us, praxology@formation.org.uk, and we'll give it a read, because it's important. And I think to underline all of these things, authority is not just from the leader. Like if you're the line structure, it's very obvious.
Yes.
But other people do have authority, even if it's given from, if you think below the line, there's that church boss kind of idea. Like there's at least one person that everybody's like, you. That there's authority at all levels of these kinds of structures.
Yeah, there can be authority that's like given to you by someone else, but there's also authority that you can cultivate and influence that you can develop from within or from underneath. Yeah,
and you can develop that authority from underneath, as it were, not being a leader, by leading yourself. That again, that's part of our model, Mac Lake. There, but in what we've said, leading self leads to leading others well, and wielding authority appropriately. Like everybody has authority to some level. How do we leverage that to empower other people rather than finding my place so I can be at the top?
Yeah,
that's maybe too much of a dichotomy to be helpful. But in terms of how we're thinking of leading teams and ourself within that, how do I use the authority that I do have from the relational capacity or the relational capital that I have? And then also, like within my own position, what authority do I have? So there's even multiple levels of authority that we can think about. How do we leverage these things in real time on our teams and try to seek that cruciform model of bearing our cross in humility? Yeah. Any final thoughts?
So many thoughts. But I think that the one that I'm taking away from this, and I'll keep thinking about, is how am I using my authority to build others up, not just myself, and not just protect my position, but it's very much the kingdom model that Jesus presents, or that Luke in particular presents at the beginning of his gospel. That the kingdom of God, is one in which those who are humble are lifted high, and those who are proud and hold on tightly to their authority are actually brought low. And so that's how are we stewarding that, like you said, and how can we be using our authority to lift others up?
Yeah, and philosophically, to say the same thing, to be somewhat provocative right as we end, because it's fun for thinking. When you disperse authority, you're actually given more authority. I won't explain that statement.
Just let it hang.
Thank you for joining in with us today, and stay tuned for next time for a deeper look at authority in a more positive sense. We did get into some of that, and maybe we'll bring in some biblical examples and some other things as well. If you enjoy these episodes on Praxology, looking at you on YouTube, thank you for watching. Those of you listening, thank you for listening. And we simply ask you to take one more step to share. Like this thing, smash the subscribe button, follow along with us so you know exactly what's coming and can look forward to it with great anticipation to join the conversation with us, and then share that with other people, because we can have a broader listening audience and more people participating in this conversation if you help us out by simply giving us a share. Maybe also you could shout it from the rooftop to your friends. Stand on your balcony and just shout Praxology at everybody.
That'll work so well.
That never works in Europe.
Make so many friends.
Maybe just share it on social media. That tends to work better.
There you go.
Thank you for joining in with us, and blessings until next time.
See you next time.